I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. We're very pleased today to have Kathy Strain with us. Tom, would you like to jump in and kick this off?
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go too far, I just want to say thank you for everybody that sent in the questions. And if you if you like the show, click like and subscribe, and you can support us with Patreon, and the link is in the description. And I want to say this is going to be a real treat. Kathy, thank you for joining us and being on the show today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
And the question I asked you just before we went on the air was, I guess you've had an encounter, but also you are an archaeologist for the U.S. Forest Service. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what your job description is?
Oh, sure. I am the Forest Archaeologist and Tribal Relations Program Manager for the Stanislaus National Forest in California. And it means that I am the head person who handles the history, the prehistory, and the living tribes that still use our national forests. And so essentially my job, my other archaeologists, that work with me, but I'm in charge of them. Before the Forest Service does a project on the ground, like disturbs the soil, cuts trees, those kinds of things, we make sure that there aren't sites in the way. There aren't things that are really significant to history that may get damaged by that activity. And I also assist the tribes that gather plants and other resources off of our national forest. So it really is a lot of fun.
Do you do any historical research into areas where the tribes have, you could say, okay, this particular section of this forest, this tribe was active there, 200 years ago, that sort of thing?
Yep, that's what I do.
Okay. So it makes, I would imagine it makes your job a little easier to, you're saying, okay, you guys are getting ready to disturb the soil or do some digging over there. And how would you go about, do you dig the soil and do you bring a team in there to look for artifacts, or what exactly?
We do something that's called pedestrian survey. So we walk the ground and look for things that we know that occur on this forest. We have a lot of bedrock mortars, which are kind of like grinding cups. Of course, then there's lots of lithics, projectile points, that kind of thing. And, if we don't have very good ground cover, then we might stick a couple of shovels in. But generally here, our soils are pretty shallow. And so there's enough that we can see the ground that we don't have to usually stick a shovel in the ground.
Okay. And kind of moving in the direction of our topic here, Bigfoot, have you, as an archaeologist for the Forest Service, have you had any, trying to think how to say this, information on the tribes, any of the tribes that you've studied and worked with, current or historically, that points to Bigfoot?
Oh, yes. In particular, I work with the Miwok tribe and the Washoe tribe. And the Miwok have tons of stories about Bigfoot. They have ancient stories as well as modern stories. And I've even been in the field with them. One time we were doing a field check on a meadow, and one of the elders had what he believed to have been experienced with a Bigfoot during that event. And so their traditional stories are tied to landscape features that we have on my national forest or in the general area. And so it's fascinating to study because they have a deep relationship with Bigfoot.
How do the ancient stories, the details of the ancient stories, compare with the modern stories, the modern accounts? And do you see like repeating patterns or information that would be the same in the past as what you're hearing today?
Oh, yes. In particular, I think one of the more interesting things that I've discovered is so the older stories always talked about that there were certain Bigfoots that were good and certain Bigfoots that were bad, and they had different names for them. So a good Bigfoot is Yayali. And I can't pronounce the word that means he's a bad guy. And that actually is the same belief that they have today. In fact, I had a phone call not all that long ago from a guy from the Washoe tribe, and he had seen me on television. And I guess I had never had a conversation with him about Bigfoot, or he wasn't ready to tell me before. But he said, I just want to let you know that, about you have a bad Bigfoot on your side of the mountains. The Washoe typically, they're somewhat on the eastern slope of the Sierras, but Lake Tahoe area down to my national forest. And he said, well, you got two good ones and you have one bad one. And I said, oh, really? And he told me their names. And of course, I didn't have a pen anywhere near me, and so I couldn't write it down. And of course, can't remember anything. And so, and I found that to be very interesting. And I said, well, how do you know that he's bad? And he was just like, well, because they do bad things, and they have a traditional story related to a cave that I have in my forest, where that cave belonged to the bad Bigfoot, and he would eat people and throw their bodies down the cave shaft. And that is actually a true fact. We have a cave, that very cave, and it has human remains that were collected from that cave in the 1960s. And so there's a law called the Native American Graves Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA. I probably butchered that, but anyway, we tried to give those remains back to the local tribe, and they wouldn't have it. And I said, well, why not? And they go, well, that's not our people. We weren't stupid enough to let Bigfoot catch us to eat us. And so those are somebody else. And so we tried to do DNA, but it didn't come out conclusive. But the age of the remains did prove that they were not Miwok.
Wow. So there actually are good ones and bad ones, and apparently there's a way to distinguish. Well, obviously, the bad ones when they do bad things.
Yeah.
So what do the good ones do?
Well, they can be a protector, and that's typically what I find, and especially in California, that the good ones are the protectors of the forest, the protectors of nature. Bring balance to the earth, kind of thing. A healthy forest has a healthy Bigfoot looking after it because he's caring for it. And in a lot of ways, what they believed is that we haven't allowed him to fulfill his role, and that's why our forests are in such bad condition, and why we have these gigantic wildfires and all that goes with it, is because we've kind of cut him out of the cycle of how we manage it. And of course, I always make a funny where, well, if he wants to do the work, I'm more than happy to meet with him and get him restarted on whatever it is that he needs to do. And they just kind of, like, all right, Kathy. But in a lot of tribes, they also believe that once Bigfoot is discovered, that's the end of this age, that a whole new age then starts from that moment. And various tribes have told me that equates to the earth ending, or this, we go away. And other tribes have told me, no, it's a higher level of enlightenment that happens when that occurs. So some tribes believe it's really, really bad, and some people some tribes believe it'll be a good thing.
So just before we got on the air, you had mentioned that you also had an encounter of your own. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. I was in Oklahoma. I had been invited by the NAWAC to an area that they've been doing work for many years, and it's called Area X. And it's not Area X to be ominous. It would just, they named their research areas, X, Y, Z, and this just happens to be, X. And so they had been telling me about this area for a while, and just can't get away, my kids in school and all that stuff. And one year, 2012, I told my husband, I said, well, let's just make a trip out of it. We hadn't seen his mom for a while. His mom lived in Texas, and we could just make a little vacation out of it. And so we went. It was May of 2012, and it's probably one of the hardest roads ever. And I'm a Forest Service archaeologist, and so we have some awful roads. And if anybody's driven on Forest Service roads knows we have some barely believable that they are a road. And this
I
road
have no
was
idea
really,
what you're talking about.
I've been on a lot, but this road into X was probably the worst road I've ever been on in my entire life. I thought there was just no way we were gonna make it, and then somebody was gonna have to come get us, and we're miles away from any civilization. And thankfully, there were people that were expecting us, and we were going in with one other person that had his own car. So we figured, either way, one way we'd get it out. And so we get in there, and nothing happens the first day. It was just boring. And the second day is where everything happened. And there's 4 cabins there, and we had spent the afternoon running around like a bunch of hillbillies, I guess. But something was throwing rocks onto the tin roofs of the cabins, and you run over to one, and then a rock would get thrown on the other cabin. You'd run over there, and then another rock would get thrown on another cabin. So we're just running around. And I finally got tired of it. I was like, this is ridiculous. We're not going to accomplish anything doing it this way. And so I stayed behind, and I'm just, just talked a little bit out loud. I have kind of a high voice. I thought maybe that could be interesting because not many women go in there. And so we're sitting there, I'm standing there, and the guys finally come back, and there's 5 of us there total, including my husband. And we sit down, and there's this big old fire pit there, but we didn't have a fire because it's, summer and May, it's hot, and it was still daylight. It was in the late afternoon, and we started to hear something walking. And we thought it was this little fox that you'd like to hang around with us because we give it scraps and stuff. And I look up, and there's this place called the Bottleneck. So this whole area is just overgrown, thick trees. On the ground, there's greenbrier that catches your feet. There's, not much clear land. You have to weave and bob to get through the landscape because you're moving branches or you're stepping over dead logs and all the stuff that goes with that. And I am looking towards what we call the bottleneck because it used to be a long time ago a driveway, but it had since been overgrown with vegetation, but it was still relatively clear of trees. It had grasses and stuff, but no trees in it. And there they are. They're walking right at us. There's 2 of them, a big one and a little one. And I jumped up and I go, there they are. And I start running towards them. And of course, that startled them to get out. And they then turned and bolted up the slope that is behind the cabin like unbelievable. It's like they had been on a bungee and had been suddenly released. From me, they were as quiet as a mouse. They were like ghosts almost, how they just floated as quickly as possible going up that hillside. And there was 4 of us total that saw exactly the same thing, with one member looking towards the outhouse or something. He just didn't see it. So, and then that just started, that whole week was, by the end of that week, I thought I was going to have to go to therapy for all the stuff that happened. It was just constant something banging on the cabin, making noises, throwing rocks, whistling, tree knocks. It was just a week of just unbelievable activity.
What did your family think about all this?
Oh, they think it's cool. I mean, they all believe in Bigfoot. So they've outside of, well, Bob and I, of course, have had several experiences. But yeah, they fully believe that I saw one, and they're real animals.
Right. I'm just thinking, if all this activity's going on, I mean, was anybody on edge? Were you nervous?
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, at first, after this, I kind of went into this little bit of shock of just realizing that you can't win this, because if one of those, it was a big and a small one, but there's seen bigger ones on that general area. And it kind of dawned on me that if one of those big ones just picked me up and took off, there's nothing anybody could have done about it, because they're as unbelievably fast. They're huge. The ones that I saw, I thought were younger ones. So like the little one, I thought was maybe, what we would consider a 12-year-old, something like that. And the bigger one, I thought it was more of a teenage female. And even then, they were huge in the sense of how wide and bulky and obviously very, very muscular. And so if you got an average male that we think is 7 foot tall, you just can't, you got nothing on them. I mean, they could sweep in, grab whatever they wanted to, and be gone. And you'd just be sitting there going, well, I guess, Kathy's a gunner now, because you'd never find me. And so it was just that kind of shock that kind of was like, well, maybe we shouldn't be here. Maybe we need to go home. But we stuck it out, and I just ended up telling everybody, if you ever find my body, look at my hands, because hopefully there'll be at least a clump of hair in it. I tried to fight, my way down.
Yeah. So you see these two, they're walking towards you, and they obviously they see you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Once I yelled at him, and I ran at him.
And then that sent them they kind of turned heels and took off running. What color was the hair on them?
They were very dark, blackish, very, very dark brown or black. And the sun was on them, and so it was hard to tell the difference, but it was just very, very dark. And they looked exactly like Patty. Exactly.
Oh,
just
okay.
One solid color.
And they're very bulky.
Yes. Powerful. Muscular.
Wow.
Not heavy, not like fat or anything like that, but muscular. So the one, when I stopped myself, I started running, so I ended up at the bottom of the slope, and I could see them still running up the hill, and I just focused on the bigger one to take in every detail that I could possibly get. And the thing had put its arms next to its side, and it was doing that kind of marathon runner type of movement with its arms, and I could see the thick thighs with the muscle on it going up into its buttocks, and it was nothing but muscle. There wasn't, it was pretty amazing. It was just all muscle.
Now this was your first encounter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is
yes.
That's absolutely incredible, a very significant one. Have you had any other encounters?
Yes. So I had the following year in 2013, Bob and I were so wanting to have that experience again, because it was just, even though we were traumatized, it was just worth it, in the sense of having that experience. So the following year, 2013, we agreed that he would go with a friend for 3 weeks there, and I would stay and watch the kids. And then he would come back, and I would go for 3 weeks while he watched the kids. And so my first week there, I was sitting on the back porch just trying to catch a breeze, because boy, was it hot. It was June. And I saw this tree branch wobbling, and I was like, oh, okay, well, there's something on that branch. And I saw this dark black, I thought it was a chimpanzee. I literally was thinking to myself, I'm at the zoo, there's a chimp, a small chimp, on that tree branch. And I said, it's going to jump over to the next tree. And that's exactly what this thing did. And then I got, Kathy, for crying out loud, there's not a chimp loose in Oklahoma. That's ridiculous. And so I said, oh my God, I just saw this baby Bigfoot in this tree, and this is where it went. And we ran down there, and we were just so slow compared to these things. It had already moved so far along. All you could do is see all the other tree branches that were still bouncing up and down, that it had, basically it was running through the trees, And later on that week, one of the other members of the team saw the same thing.
Yeah, they are absolutely incredibly fast. It's as if what I've described was the motion was, it's almost like it's over before it started. They're just,
yeah.
What do you think? How do you think it's just because they're out in the wilderness and they're in the wild, they're constantly moving, so they're going to be very naturally athletic and muscular? Do you think that's pretty much the reason why they're so quick and agile?
Oh yeah, I mean they're built for their environment. I mean, all animals adapt to, adapt or perish. So you have to have the best qualities to live in that environment. And so the need to think about how far they likely walk in a day just to get the resources that they need to survive. I mean, that's for humans. Humans don't walk 20 miles in a day. I mean, maybe there's some that do, but very few of us. And so an animal that has to walk that far is going to get skills that we don't have. And part of that adaptation is, they have that flexible foot so that they can, go up hillsides a lot easier. They're all muscle because they're constantly moving. They probably, the food resources that they have are not fatty at all, but they provide the protein that they need to survive. But you may have to travel, 3 miles one direction for one thing, 3 miles in another direction for something else. And so, yeah, I think they're perfectly adapted. And for us, we're not surprised. Our brain is so wired to see things that we know. We don't like seeing things we don't know. And so I think if we they probably could in a burst probably would be extremely, extremely fast. But for us to see something that looks like us be so fast, I think that's part of hurts our brains to get us all wrapped around it, because how is something on 2 feet that able to do the things that they're doing? And it's just how they evolved. They evolved to be the best of the best of the best.
Yeah, and that really makes sense. And that's a good point, because you see these creatures that are 1,100, 1,500 pounds, and you'd think they'd be lumbering beasts, and they're anything but. Mm-hmm. They're very quick and very agile.
Yeah, and it's I equate that to, I won't use any names, but there's a gentleman that I know that's a little bit more on the heavy set side, but Lord, you get him going and he is unbelievably fast. And so it's just deceiving, that what you think of somebody should be able to do or some animal should be able to do. And then when they exceed your expectations, and it's your brain that's, going, what? I didn't expect that.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. What came first for you? Did you believe in Bigfoot before you saw it, or did you have to see it? What evidence and what brought you to the point that you said, okay, these things are real?
Well, I am probably one of the weirdest backgrounds. I only became an archaeologist because of Bigfoot. So when I was a little girl, I saw Legend of Boggy Creek, and I just was instantaneously fascinated with what this thing was. And my family is originally from Texas and Arkansas and those areas. And so, we would go there a lot. And so I kept thinking to myself, oh man, every time we go out in the woods, we could have this opportunity. And so around, I think it was 5th grade, I asked my teacher what I had to do to study Bigfoot for a living. And she said, well, I'd go into anthropology. That's probably what it is, like an ape. And I said, great. And so that's the path I started on. I was like, oh, I'm going to be an anthropologist. And, I figured it out. Nobody was going to pay me to study Bigfoot. The rest of science didn't believe in it. But it was always interesting whenever I had a biology or an anthropology class, there was always at least one page dedicated to the Patterson-Gimlin film. They would always conclude it was a hoax, but it's interesting that was always included in those scholarly books. But because I was already on the path of anthropology, I already loved it. It was already a natural fit for me because we were always, my family, when we went on vacations, we went to national parks, national forests. We never went to like Disneyland or any of that stuff. We were always camping and driving to the next historical site or all those things that go with it. So that's the way it ended. I mean, it ended up well. And I also was born and raised in Porterville, California. And the Tule River Indians have a reservation above the town and are in the foothills above the town. And they have some rock art there. And I saw it. So I think I saw it in high school, as I recall, but nobody told me what the pictographs were about. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I was up there with a professor, and she told me, oh, they have these people believe in Bigfoot, and this is their creation story, and pointed the stuff out. And I still even have a photo of that day that we were there. It's actually kind of amazing. And so I said, oh my goodness, Native Americans believe in Bigfoot. Oh, this is even better. I can mix, the two. And so I always, when I would meet with tribes as part of my job, during breaks or whatever, I would start asking questions, like, so do you guys believe in Bigfoot? And if you do, can you tell me about it? And that's just how I kind of mixed the two all my life, is that fascination with that. If Native Americans believe in Bigfoot and they have all these very old stories and these old pictographs and stuff, why doesn't science pay attention to that? Why doesn't the rest of the world go, of course Bigfoot's real? Even though I haven't seen one myself, what are these people doing, making this up? And so so that was my path of how I got it. So I had believed in Bigfoot since I was probably 7 or 8. And then it took all that time for me to then actually have my own experience.
What about have you done any studies where tribes all throughout North America have a word for Bigfoot, or a story, a legend, a lore of Bigfoot long before the time of mass communications? Have you looked into that at all?
Yes, I actually have a book about it. It's called, now it's going to jump out of my head. I can't believe that just happened. It's Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters, Bigfoot and Native Culture. And it's a collection of stories from throughout Canada, Alaska, and all of North America. And it's the traditional stories associated with the tribes based on what we call cultural area. And so, like the Plains is considered a cultural area, this southeastern part of America. And then there's an appendix at the end that has the traditional name, the tribe, and what the word means. And so there's hundreds of different names that tribes have.
Yeah, and I find that interesting because, again, this predates, it goes back not centuries, but millennia.
Oh, yeah.
There must have been something.
That's something you have to think about, is that If all these tribes were describing the same animal across the entire United States, that's not, they didn't invent an animal here in California and somehow get it spread to the thousands and thousands of Native Americans that had different languages. It's not like the Yokits could tell, one person something and then hope it gets all the way over to the eastern coast and we all be united in believing in this creature. I mean, that's just ridiculous. They talked about things that were in their environment, animals that were there for them to see. And traditional stories are meant for teaching. They're meant to pass on through time what values the tribe has to the next generation. They didn't have written words, and so the story lays out what they're wanting to save to make sure the next generation has the same belief systems. And most tribes, they supported smaller groups during most of the year, and then the winters when they all came together to be in the main village, because that's when you start, you can't hunt or do much in that time period, and so you're coming together in the winter time and then telling those stories around the campfires.
So, quick question regarding your current employment. How does the Forest Service, do you have any kind of feedback or trying to think how to say this, but do you have any official position as a Forest Service employee on Bigfoot? And if somebody was to walk into, I'm assuming you probably work in a ranger station or something, somebody was to walk in and ask a question, would you be able to go in and say, well, here's what I know and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, my bosses know that I'm on television. I'm on a series on Friday nights called The Proof Is Out There. They know about that. They approved the book, and I often get that somebody comes to the front desk. I work in the main office, and so they probably get a little more of this up in the higher ranger districts. But they go, "This guy's got something to say," and I go, "Okay," and I go down and talk to him, write down his name. We've had many, many emails come in. They just come into our regular Forest Service website and they forward all of them to me, and I take care of it. And we've had some pretty good ones. This poor, just before COVID, this poor man and his son had a horrible experience. Just scared the bejeebers out of them. They were hunting and they saw a Bigfoot in an area where we get a lot of Bigfoot sightings. And decided, oh man, we can't do this. And they started to basically freaked out, was throwing all their stuff in the car. And one of our rangers happened to come on and said, oh my goodness, are you okay? What's going on? And they go, oh my God, we just saw this thing happen and just, we can't stay here. And he was able to give them my name and said, when you feel like it, please talk to this lady. And they called my house, and I was just like, and so my husband talked to him and wrote down everything that happened. And the guy, that poor guy, I still feel really bad for him. He goes, I'm never going back in the forest ever again. And my husband was like, no, really, this is really rare for you to see one. I don't think you're going to have this experience probably again. He goes, oh no, something will happen to me again. And so, so yeah, that's not, it's common knowledge on the forest. And I've even gotten a couple calls from a neighboring forest as well, where they go, well, we don't know what to tell you here, contact Kathy.
That was my next question was, do you ever, because you're federal, so it would be quite okay for other districts, even outside of the state of California, if they wanted to, I'm assuming, contact you for information. And what do you do? Do you take a report? Do you write it down?
Yeah, I take a report and I write it down, get their contact information, and if it's close to me, I'll likely take care of it. But if it's in a location too far away from me, and I know a lot of people, I try to pass it on to somebody in that area, because these are the ones you want. You want the ones that just happened, not the stuff that was 40, 50 years ago. You want this literally just happened to me this afternoon, or yesterday, this is what happened. And so I pass them on, and And it's interesting that the variety, but they tend to come in, at least for my national forest, in certain areas. So like for one summer, we'll have a whole bunch of activity in one area, and then it'll be like 5 more years before that area comes back up again as having a lot of activity. So kind of like it moves where I'm getting all the calls from. Like one year it was Cherry Lake. I got like 7 or 8 calls about that. Then I didn't have any for 3 years. And the next big wave was up at Clark Fork. And it was like, that's so far away from each other. That's a good 50 miles in distance. So, how is that related? And then one year, gosh, Donnell Lake was the worst. We got like 30 calls about that one because there was something just making people's lives miserable. That was the mean one, I guess. But he was routinely tearing up camps, throwing rocks at people, causing commotions at nighttime where people couldn't sleep. And that only happened that one time. All the rest of them were just regular encounters where, you happened to see it, that kind of thing. It wasn't as scary. So
what do you guys do in the situation where you have one of the mean ones tearing up camps? I mean, what's your response? How do you deal with that? You don't have an animal control officer go out there and.
Well, it's interesting because community word of mouth is probably the most effective way where we just kind of get it out where, maybe this year that's not the place to go. And interestingly, there's this one place on this forest where even my own ranger, I guess you'd call him, he told me never to go there. He said, oh no, we had so many problems there that essentially they just kind of let the road get slightly washed out so that people would think twice of going into that area. And then of course, that just makes me want to go, in there. And I think we took Cliff Barrickman with us when we went in there. Nothing happened, but he was pretty adamant about, just don't go in there because he said the devil lived in there. So
have there ever been any reports of people being injured by one of these things?
No, not that I have ever received. Most of them are just, that sudden sighting, and you're scared, and they ignore you as much as possible, or maybe they're just going through the area and it's a brief encounter. So I would say no, I never have had one of those come to me.
Okay. And we've heard reports about them coming into areas, I'm thinking about even here in Oregon, where they would cross a river and go into the campgrounds and ransack the garbage cans. Have you guys, any reports of that? Have you guys ever heard of that?
We definitely had some activity near a campground that it was actually very interesting. There was a bunch of tribal people there at that campground that weekend, and it was kind of like fortuitous in my mind. And something started to make a ruckus, but it sounded like they were trying to tear into the trash cans. And one of the elders said, Yaya Lee, go away. And I guess, according to the people that were there and told me this, all the sound stopped and they didn't have any more problems. So that was their traditional name for him. And so they just kind of hinted to me that just by speaking his name, that would cause him to calm down.
Yeah. Well, you're the second person that has said that. We have a guy up in Canada, Native American or First Nations, who's kind of said the same thing, which is interesting. But they can understand nominally what we're saying.
I wasn't there, but I just had the tribal members telling me that that's what happened. But that area before had some problems, even years ago, of having lots of Bigfoot sightings and activity. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if that happened.
Yeah. Now, you talked about sometimes the Forest Service will let it, that's going to take a little bit of time, maybe a season or two. But do you know if the Forest Service ever says, all right, look, this is a bad area. We're just going to cordon it off with, logs or boulders or dirt or anything like that?
Not due to Bigfoot, no. Because it's in general, most national forests are open to camping wherever you can get to. And so we have, areas that are unsafe because of other reason, of course, have blocked those off because maybe there's the road is gone and you'll die because, you didn't see it coming as being gone, but not due to Bigfoot. Now, we discourage if there's a problem going on that we think is bear or Bigfoot or something else, we just discourage people from camping in those locations. We suggest other areas for them to go.
Ah, interesting. And bears do. I have been camping when bears come in, and they definitely ransack the garbage cans and the picnic tables, incidentally.
Yeah, and they do. And one time we were doing a project in the forest, and I had one of my there was volunteers, and we were doing archaeology. I should caution that I don't do Bigfooting on government time. So if somebody wants to talk to me about it, then I go off the clock. Or if it's very brief, I'll tell them I'll call them after hours. So I just want to make that very clear. But we were out doing this project with volunteers, and I had one of the volunteers in the middle of the night thought she heard something. And the next morning, she had made a bunch of boiled eggs for her time. We were going to be there like 4 days, and something had opened up her ice chest and had taken all but like 3 eggs, left her at least 3, kind of thing, and had gotten the lid of her ice chest back down perfectly without getting any dirt or anything. So we knew it wasn't a raccoon. And we figured out later that it was a bear that had done it, but I really teased her pretty hard that a Bigfoot had gotten into her ice chest and was considerate enough to leave her some food. And I mean, she was not happy with me. She couldn't sleep for 3 days.
But she's okay with the bear doing that, right?
Well, we made her then move her ice chest because we had told everybody you have to keep them in the bear safe lockers kind of thing. So, but we don't have bear. I know there's a lot of people that are really, really scared of bears, but we really don't have bear attacks. They don't tear up tents or any, unless you keep a bunch of food in there, then they'll tear into your camp. But our bears are not going to kill you. They're just not interested in humans as food. They're interested in your food.
The every time I have an encounter here in Oregon, that's where I live, we have black bears, that's it. Mm-hmm. Is you usually see the back end of the bear as it's scooting away because it just knew that it discovered that you were there, and poof, they're gone.
Yeah.
That's typical black bear.
I've seen a lot of bear in my time because we have a preserve, a hunting preserve, so you can't hunt in there, and all the bears have figured it out. That's where they got to go. So,
and they are smart. They're animals. Yeah, they figured this stuff out. And I got to say, I love bears. Black bears. They're to me. I saw one recently crossing the road. Just a real cute bear. Very nice, silky, clean coat. Nice blonde snout. Just a typical black bear. Just a real treat seeing them kind of galoping across.
I love all wildlife. So except for snakes. I hate snakes.
Snakes?
Yeah.
I almost grabbed 2 rattlesnakes by accident one time, and it's a long story, but I didn't. Nope. I was glad, and I went 8 feet straight in the air. So have you had any other encounters yourself besides the ones in Oklahoma? What about anything in California?
In California, I've had seen footprints. And one of the funniest one I've had 2 that were both when I was doing an archaeology survey, and I said, "Whoa, what in the world is this?" And so that kind of was, startling in the sense that it was obvious that something had crossed in this area just before I had gotten there, and I could never figure it out where it went, because it seemed like that was very fresh, but it didn't matter. They moved obviously faster than me. But I've heard tons of howls. California, at least my experience is they communicate through howling. And in particular, we recorded the Lake Tahoe scream that sometimes they used to use on Finding Bigfoot, was recorded in the Lake Tahoe area. And I worked with a witness to get that, because there was just so much of these howls and screams going on in this area. And for me, it was because they were trying to communicate, and they had to get up and above the din you could just hear in the faint background of the casinos and stuff. But this was in the mountains that surround that area. And here in Sonora and most places that I've Bigfooted in California, the howls and the screams are fairly common, as well as wood knocks. And so those have been my primary experiences. So I've never had a sighting in the state of California. All my sightings have only been from Oklahoma.
I got to say, it's kind of encouraging to hear you talk about the howls, though, because that's hands down. I mean, I've only seen them one time, but I've heard the howls, and they're unique. There's nothing remotely that sounds like these things.
No, they're very distinctive.
Yeah, very distinctive. I heard and another one, I imagine they do it in California as well, kind of a scream bark, just a very, like a burst of scream and a bark all at once, lasts about a second and a half. Arr, arr. Have you heard that?
No, I haven't heard that one. And then I don't know if you know this or not, but the Sierra sounds, Ron Moorhead, that was actually recorded on my national forest. So that's where they were camping. And so we kind of have a long history of these experiences, but I have not heard that. And I don't know what I would think about that if I heard that. The howls are bad enough as it is.
Yeah, they're the scream barks. My wife and I were camping, and we heard those about 2 a.m, then again about 3 a.m. And yeah, it's it's interesting. And the dogs, some dogs in various camps heard it as well. So I'm like,
yeah,
I got witnesses.
Well, yeah. Oh, and that's kind of interesting too, because like I said, my children were raised basically. I have one that's very enthusiastic about Bigfoot, and another one that he hates it when people come up to me and talk about Bigfoot or anything. It just drives him crazy. And you're always going to get one kid's always going to be different. And a long time ago, we actually lived in a different house, but I got tired of us having to shovel snow, and so I said we got to move to a different elevation here. But one summer we had the window open, and my oldest son heard those howls. And he goes, "Mom, that sounds like it's just coming up the hill," and he kind of pointed to where he thought it was coming from. And that ended up being quite a summer for that. We found prints. We found what we thought was a nest that had just been constructed. These are little, you'd have a house on like 5 acres, and then the next house would be, on an acre, and it's all got Forest Service and trees all over the place. And I putting flyers out, putting them on, billboards, or putting them on, the power poles of, have you guys been having any experiences? And I just got flooded with people complaining about something howling, something doing this, something doing that. And so I started an operation, essentially, just at nighttime. I'd go up there and we take turns, rotate people, just sitting up there and getting what we could. And that was an interesting summer. We had lots of howls, and then, it never happened again. And it still hasn't. So it's very odd. There's got to be some seasonality or some sort of pattern that we're not recognizing, that a Bigfoot might come through an area that he's been to before, but maybe it's been 5 years or 10 years because he's got a way that he moves through the landscape, or something to that effect. I'm talking to a person now that it appears every spring or every fall, maybe it's every fall. He's having something come through. He has a remote piece of property and he's found prints, but it's taking all of the apple trees off the tallest part of his tree. And so, or plums, was it plums? I don't remember. And I think it's apples, but it's happened now twice in roughly the same time period. And, the tree you have to be 7 foot tall to get to the top of those apples. And so we're in contact and we're going to be testing this to see, can we predict when he's going to come back through the area? And the prints were clearly Bigfoot prints. There's no doubt about it.
You touched on something that I wanted to ask, and that is, you're an archaeologist, so, I want to ask about physical evidence, bones, if you've seen any bones or heard of bones, or if you've been in contact with people that are, maybe lateral positions in other ranger stations throughout the country. But before I get to that, I want to ask a little bit about the nest. How did you know it was a Bigfoot nest? Can you describe it?
Sure. It was, well, I can tell you, I can't prove that it was a Bigfoot nest. I just suspected that it was because it was so unusual. It was a large tree bent over. So can you imagine like you're taking the top of a pine, but this one wasn't a pine, and you're taking it and you're putting it over, and then there was this big, huge rock that had been moved. I found the location of where it had come from, and it was set on the end of this tree to keep it from flapping back up and being a tree, so it was making sure that it was a curved structure. Then there were sticks that somebody had come through this area previously and had done some pruning or done some sort of work, and there were some dead branches. So the smaller branches of the tree, of pine, had long died. So these were kind of old, like probably 6 or 7 years old. So they were clean of any other leaves. And whatever it had done, it had taken these sticks and wove them through the bent branches of the tree to kind of create a windbreak or a shelter or something to that effect. And inside, where you could crawl in, they had taken fresh fronds of trees, had taken the smaller branches off, and then created like a pad down at the bottom. Something to lay on.
Interesting. Now, when you're looking at this shelter or whatever it is, did you see any Bigfoot like footprints or any other signs around there?
Yeah, there was a print. That's how it went right to the structure, and so thinking that I had the opportunity to get some website in Tuolumne County, and you can see the pictures and stuff that's on there. I documented it with photographs, and then we excavated the pads down at the bottom, hoping we could get some hair or something from that. But it ended up that I don't believe it ever got used because I think we interrupted the process of it being used. I mean, I think it was very, very fresh in the sense, and nobody got to use it because we found it too soon. And after it gets found, my stink was all over it because I went inside and was, excavating it. And so I didn't get any hairs or any other evidence to suggest what had constructed it.
No, it's very interesting. Do you talk to any other people, either in the Forest Service or BLM or any of the other land management agencies who have an interest like you do and kind of, pursue that interest?
It's getting more than it used to. In the old days, nobody would really talk about it kind of thing, but I think it's just just like you see more Bigfoot things on television and stuff, it's beginning to be more accepted. The only interesting thing I ever had versus, another employee is we had a very, very large fire on our forest back in 2013. And I was in the field dealing with the fire when a Fish and Wildlife Service person was in our office, and he was there to, talk about, because we have some threatened endangered species, and he was talking to our biologist, and he asked to speak with me. And our biologist went, well, why do you want to talk to her for? And he goes, well, I want to talk to her about Bigfoot and what, just tell her a few things, and, that let her know that, us and Fish and Wildlife Service, we're ready. When they prove this thing is real, we're going to move on it and make sure it gets its protection. And so I never got to talk to him because I was in the field. But the biologist relayed to me what the person had said, and I was actually quite astonished by it. I was like, he told you all this? Because it just says, job protection, don't want anybody to think you're crazy. But yeah, he goes, yeah, this guy was just like, he really wanted to talk to you. And I said, well, if he comes in again, just let me know, and I'm more than happy to talk to him about it. So that's the only time I've had that I can think of where somebody, I get general questions, and, employees go, oh, you're Kathy Strain, you believe in Bigfoot. Oh, great. Well, that's cool. But nobody who said, as an agency person, I'm willing to pursue this and make sure that, we do the best science for it. I've never had anybody else do that.
I think it's interesting, though, that somebody else did contact you.
Yeah.
Well, listen, really appreciate the time tonight. And if it's okay with you, we'd like to chat with you briefly once we're off the air. So,
Sure.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. And folks, stay tuned for the next segment.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.